I love Naples. I love Collier County. And over the course of my many years here, I've had the incredible experience to understand what makes us the best place in America to live. And let me tell you, it's not just our beaches. Far from it, actually. It's our people, and it's our partnerships. And none of it's happened by accident. I've seen it time and time again. The more people learn about what's happening in our community, the more they come to the realization, this is not happening where I come from. Collier is special. Collier is unique. That's why I'm bringing you Community Matters. Think of this as your Collier County 101. I'm your guide, introducing you to the people and the resources that I think that you should know through short, real conversations so that you feel more empowered and ready to engage in ways that will positively impact your life, your family, your careers, and this beautiful place that we get to call home. Because community matters. Hello and welcome to Community Matters. I'm Amanda Pearson. Today I am so excited to introduce you to the legendary Garrett Richter. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here with you, Amanda. It's an absolute pleasure to be in your company.
Right back at you. I always like to start with a little bit of an introduction so people can truly know who you are before we get into all the details. So it's really important. I want people to know who you are. So Garrett serves as market president for First Foundation, Inc. In his role, Mr. Richter brings over 50 years of banking experience to lead the company's Florida market areas for First Foundation Bank. Prior to joining First Foundation, Mr. Richter served as a founder, president, and CEO and director of First Florida Integrity Bank and the president and director of TGR Financial, Inc., the bank's holding company. Mr. Richter's banking career began at Mellon Bank in February 1969, which I can't wait to share more about this story.
Yep.
But his employment was interrupted when he entered the Army in November of 1969. He was awarded a Bronze Star, the Combat Infantry Badge, and Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry while serving in Vietnam with the 75th Ranger Company from 1970 to 1971. Mr. Richter was elected to the Florida Legislature in 2006. He served one term in the Florida House of Representatives, followed by 2 terms in the Florida Senate, where he was the president pro tempore from 2012 to 2016. Did I say that right? Pro tempore?
You did.
Pro tem.
You
Okay.
did.
During his tenure in the Florida Senate, he chaired the Senate Banking and Insurance Committee, the Senate Gaming Committee, and the Ethics and Elections Committee. Garrett also served as the chairman of the Florida Defense Support Task Force from 2015 to 16, working to protect and enhance Florida's military missions and installations. Wow. Mr. Richter is the past chairman of the Greater Naples Chamber of Commerce and is an alumnus and past Board of Regents member of Leadership Florida and past chairman of Leadership Collier. He served as director of Florida Home Loan Bank of Atlanta from 2019 to 2021 and previously served on the Florida Ethics Commission. Wow. I know there's so much more, including all of the past boards that you've served on. You're currently serving on the David Lawrence Center's board. And this is why it's such an honor to have you here today. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Amanda. It's good to be here.
So to provide just a little context, I've had the honor of working with you in some capacity for the last 13 years. And I've heard your presentations that you've given to both students and professionals alike. And I firmly believe that it has changed lives. And it's definitely changed my life, and I tell you this all of the time.
Oh, thank you.
I had to remind when I worked with the students, I had to remind them, you can't all say that Garrett Richter was your favorite part of he was the biggest impact of what we were doing. For me, I know that and I tell you this all the time too, I hear your little sayings in my head when I'm having conversations or I'm in particular moments, and I'm like, you've made such an impact. It really, and I'm so excited to have you here today so others, maybe hundreds of thousands, can now hear some of these little gems so that they can, have that same feeling. As it relates to Community Matters, I'm thinking to myself, man, obviously your history and involvement has been all about the community. But when it comes to what we're going to talk about today, I'm kind of like how to be a decent human 101. It's like these little things that you have to say, but they're integral. They're foundational, in my opinion.
So that being said, we're not going to focus much on your career in banking, just a little bit about your beginning, but more of the principles behind them. So I want to just start with how you got your job with Mellon Bank. It's such a fascinating story. And so if you could share what that was like and what did that teach you?
Well, Amanda, thank you. And you've heard it many times as I begin my speeches. And when I was in high school, I was a bit of a troublemaker, rather undisciplined. And as a result of that, I managed to not graduate from high school. And the day of our high school graduation was a pretty traumatic day in the Richter family because I failed chemistry my senior year. Because of failing chemistry, I had to go to summer school to repeat chemistry before I received my diploma. My father came to me and said, "Son, I was prepared to pay for your dormitory room in college, but you didn't manage to get out of high school on time. So you have to pay for your bedroom until you do." Said differently, he told me I had to get a job. I had no skills, but I did get a job. I interviewed for a job at Mellon Bank, and they hired me. And that was in 1968. They hired me as to be a janitor in the bank. And I recall very vividly my first day on the job. I got ready to leave my house, and my father stopped me on my way out of the house, and he looked me up and down. I had on a pair of slacks and a T-shirt, and he said, "Son, I thought you were going to work at Mellon Bank today." I said, "I do, Dad." He looked at me, he said, "Well, you don't go to work at Mellon Bank dressed like that." And as I said, I had slacks and a T-shirt on. And I said, "Well, Dad, I'm going to be a janitor at the bank." He said, "Son, you don't go to work at Mellon Bank dressed like that." I said, "Dad, for Pete's sakes, I'm going to be in the sub basement of the Union Trust Building." He said, "You don't go to work at Mellon Bank dressed like that." He stood up and he walked up the steps. He came back down and he handed me a briefcase. And that morning, I went down to the corner and I got on the 77C Shadyside bus that went from where I lived into downtown Pittsburgh. And as I boarded that bus, I carried a briefcase and I had a suit and tie on. And everybody on the bus, bankers, businessmen, attorneys, everybody seemed to carry a briefcase and they had a suit and tie on. We'd drive into work on the bus. The bus would pull in front of the Union Trust Building. About 8 of us would get off and go into that office building where there was a bank of elevators. 7 guys would get on this elevator and they'd go up. I'd get on this elevator and I'd go down. And I'd go down to the sub basement, take a table like this is in front of us, and I'd set my briefcase on the table. I'd open it up. I'd take out my slacks and T-shirt, and I would change clothes, and I would work all day as a janitor and an archives clerk. At the end of the day, I would go in, wash my hands and face. I would take my dirty clothes off, put them in my briefcase. I'd put my suit and tie back on. I'd go up the elevator. These jokers were coming down the elevator. We'd get on the bus, and we would go home. There was a man on that bus that on the morning to work and in the afternoon home from work, he and I would talk about Pittsburgh Steeler football, Pirate baseball, whatever was in the news. We would just have great conversations. And I'm in this job about 5 or 6 months. And out of left field, he offers me a position in the trust department of Mellon Bank. You see, he didn't know that I was a janitor. When my father gave me that briefcase, he said, "Son, you don't dress for the job you have. You dress for the job you want." And so he'd offered me that position not knowing. Now, I will tell you, I was excited about that, but I never got the opportunity to accept that job offer because I got another job offer, as you've already alluded to in my introduction, and that job offer came from the government. And it offered me a position in the United States Army with training and travel. And so I accepted that. I was drafted. And they trained me and sent me to Vietnam, where, as you've just introduced, I served on a 6-man Special Forces Ranger team for a year in Vietnam.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your service. And I also know so much more when you came back. You're Dad thought you could get a break, and your dad wouldn't let that happen either. But there's more to that. Well, unfortunately, just due to timing, I want to fast forward now to, obviously I shared your history in banking and the great success that you had there. So that story of how you started to where you got to where you are today is unbelievable. And I thank you for sharing that. But after in the middle of a very successful career in banking, you considered and did become eventually an elected official.
Yep.
And at some point, I mean, this story for me is something I think about often in politics with politicians and people who have careers in politics, and also just I think in leadership. What motivates people is so foundational. So can you share a little bit about why did you decide to go from banking to an elected position? And you had a mentor along the way share a very, very important piece of advice with you that I hope everybody remembers. Why and what was that?
Well, thank you. Yeah, fast forward the clock from Vietnam, 20 years later, 19 years later, I worked for the bank for another 19 years. Ellen transferred me to Naples. I ended up starting a bank with Gary Tice, my partner. He and I started a bank, and we grew it extremely successful. We grew it from 12 employees to become the largest community bank headquartered in the state of Florida. Fifth Third acquired that bank, and I entered into a 4-year no-compete agreement. And that was the first pebble of how I got involved in the public arena. But it kind of reverted back to some advice my father gave me years earlier. And that advice was, he said, a good recipe for life is to learn, earn, and return. So it gave me the opportunity to contemplate, what am I going to do now that I'm out of banking? And so Dudley Goodlett in this town and I connected, and Dudley encouraged me to run for the state legislature. I did. I was successful. And but while I was walking down the path considering the run, my wife and I flew up to Tallahassee to get a feel of the land, and we met with a couple that we knew very well from Leadership Florida, Cliff and Lee Hinkle. And Lee Hinkle was the senior vice president at Florida State University in charge of government relations. And so I asked her for advice. I said, I'm considering running. And she gave me great advice, and others have heard it before, but she looked me in the eye and she said, Garrett, there are typically only 2 reasons that most people run for public office. Number 1, they want to be something. Or number 2, they want to do something. And she looked me in the eye and she said, if you want to be something, my advice is to go home and rethink it. But if you want to do something, I would encourage you to do it, and I'm confident that you'll be successful. I pondered that statement, and I thought the only thing I really wanted to be was a good husband to my wife and a good father to my children. And so I decided that I wanted to do something. And I looked at her husband, and I said, Cliff, do you have any advice for me? And he said, well, Garrett, actually I do. He said, if you're going to run for this office, I'm confident you'll be elected. And my advice comes after you're elected. My advice is, once you're elected, don't drink the Kool-Aid. And I got to Tallahassee, and there's a Kool-Aid stand on every corner for the elected officials. But I took my wife up there with me, and if I came home after a day at the Capitol with Kool-Aid around my mouth, my wife would say, go wash your face and sit down. Dinner will be ready shortly.
You said you had to come home to get the disrespect you deserve.
That's exactly the line I've used. Yep. Yeah. The day after I was elected, I went from 5'6" to 6'5". It seemed like everybody it's baloney. It's amazing how people, once they're elected to a public office, think that their IQ went up overnight.
Well, I love this so much, and I use this in my head all the time when I'm thinking again about leadership, or elected officials. It's like you can almost tell when people want to, and try not to be judgmental here, but you hope that people really want to do something. They're in positions to do something, do the good work, make it happen, work for the mission, and not for the title and the Kool-Aid.
Yep.
And I know how well respected you are and were then in Tallahassee because you ooze that. You ooze mission, and you're just a great example of that. And I love the way that you phrase it. I hope if I could wave a magic wand that every one of us would think about, why am I doing this? Is it to be something or is it to do something?
Yep.
And because it's not just in public positions. It's in business and wealth. It's in
everything.
life.
Yeah. Yep.
I love that. Thank you. Kind of, taking a little bit of a turn, but not really. Same theme, right? How to be a decent person 101. You've shared a little parable with students about honesty.
Yep.
And, obviously, honesty is integral as well. You've shared how you've been able to do several business deals with a handshake because you're an honest individual.
Yep.
But this parable is, I feel like, an excellent visual. So what's that little parable, if you wouldn't mind humoring me?
It kind of goes back to as a young man and the good advice I got from my father. My father once told me when I was in high school, he said, son, he said, above all, be true unto yourself. Above all, be true unto yourself. Then he went on to say, and let me tell you, son, you don't have a good enough memory to be a liar. He said, if you always tell the truth, you don't need a good memory. You don't have to remember what you told somebody. And so what I would share with the kids in the Youth Leadership Collier program, and I would also share it with pages that came up to Tallahassee, is always be honest. Always tell the truth. And the parable that you're referring to was a boy grew up on a farm, and he had a bad habit of lying. And he would lie a lot, and his father was frustrated with him. So his father told him one day, he said, every time you tell a lie, I'm going to put a nail above the barn door. I'm just going to hammer a nail in above the barn door. Young fella didn't think twice about it. And so every day, a lie, another nail, another nail. On Sundays after church, the congregation a lot would come out to the farm and they'd have a Sunday brunch. And finally, these nails accumulated, and people started saying, hey, asking the farmer, what's with the nails above your barn door? And the farmer told them that, well, those nails, unfortunately, each time my son tells a lie, I put a nail up there, and those all represent lies that he's told. And with people asking that question, it embarrassed the son. So he went to his father and said, Dad, you got to stop putting the nails in. He said, I will if you'll stop lying. He said, you got to take those nails down. And the father said, I'll tell you what, I'll take a nail, I'll remove a nail every day you go without lying. So the boy stopped lying, and each day a nail was removed, and a nail was removed, and a nail was removed. And following Sunday, the congregation comes for lunch, and they get there, and they look at the barn door, and somebody says, what's with all those holes above the barn door? Lying is no good. People remember if you're a liar. And I always followed that advice up with guarding your reputation. Not only the truth that you seek and tell, but the friends that you associate yourself with. Build a reputation that people admire. Build yourself a reputation that people respect. And build a reputation that you are proud of. And if you do that, you'll fall asleep on the way to the pillow, and you'll enjoy the person you brush your teeth with in the morning.
Thank you, Garrett. I know that that's a presentation, and a lot of what we're talking about are some things that you've shared with students. But man, I know adults can benefit from this as well. It seems so simple, right? Don't lie. It leaves a scar forever.
Yep.
But what a great visual representation. Thank you for sharing that. You've already mentioned learn, earn, and return is a foundational principle for you that you inherited from your father. And as I mentioned in your biography, you aren't just, leading banks, you are leading communities and always have. Is there anything more to, the learn, earn, and return? Is there anything more to that? Why have you always done this? And what might you encourage others to do the same?
Well, the learn, earn, and return, you're learning all your life. You learn as a child, you learn nonverbal expressions, smiles on the face, then you learn how to add and subtract, you learn how to speak English, you learn about history. You're learning all your life. And as an adult, it's a different environment, but you're learning from other people. The earn, you have to go to work. You have to create a career. And so you can provide for yourself and your family if you're fortunate enough to have a family. And then the return part, it's kind of like the icing on the cake. So think of the learning and the earning as building a cake. And the returning is just spreading the icing on top. It makes it rewarding to return. I get involved right now. I'm involved with the David Lawrence Center, our mental health center in Collier County, in Naples. And we only have 2 mental health centers. One's the David Lawrence Center and others the county jail. And it provides critical services to veterans, to children, to adults. And the difference that center makes in people's lives is phenomenal, and it's the reward that I get. And I'm actually chairing the board, and my wife's on the president's council, and it's because we have a personal affiliation with it. And probably everybody, or most everybody listening to this podcast, knows somebody or knows of somebody that's heart breaks because of mental challenges, and so it's just rewarding to give back to the community in a meaningful way. And whether it's coaching Little League Baseball or dealing with mental health issues or helping out at the Humane Society, dramatically all different topics. Embrace something in the community and you will get back tenfold that which you put into it.
Thank you for that. And thank you for all that you've done over the many years with the community and your community leadership. Your fingerprints are all over Collier County, and we're so grateful for that. Last but not least, you and I were chatting before this interview about this concept of juggling balls.
Yep.
And I don't want to take it away, but I want to end with this one last visual principle that you have always described to others. And again, it's hit me deep. So can you share a little bit about this visual?
Amanda, I am delighted to share it. I've told all my employees in the banking business, we have a lot of employees that happen to be women with families. And I would tell every one of our bankers that you wake up one day, you find yourself, you're juggling 14 balls in the air. Mothers and fathers, they have children, they have their work responsibilities, they have their children, they have their after-school sports, they've got their children's activities. And you wake up one day and you've got 14 balls in the air that you're juggling. And I encouraged every one of our bankers and everybody I talked to, I said, of the 14 balls that you juggle on a daily basis, 13 of those balls are rubber and 1 is glass. And I've encouraged all the people that I've ever come in touch with or worked with that if you're going to drop a ball, and eventually you do because 14 balls are difficult to juggle. If you're going to drop a ball, drop a rubber ball. The rubber balls will bounce. Don't ever drop the glass ball because it will shatter. And the glass ball is your family. Make sure you keep the glass ball in the air all the time. The other balls that you're juggling with your life, work, sports, they bounce. Keep the black glass ball in the air. It's your family.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you so much. I am thrilled for our conversation today. I am so thankful that more will get to hear these beautiful words. I could talk to you for another hour, at least, about how a bill is made.
Oh, yeah. The ice cream.
The ice cream.
Yep.
I could, for another episode, everybody. Or your poetry. which, only if people know what I'm talking about. If you know, you know. And if you don't, maybe you can bless them with your poetry someday.
Well, the poetry is being overrun by AI, but I still do poems. I give it a try.
Oh, gosh, honestly, I don't know how you do it. I really don't. Oh, man, you've made it if Garrett Richter's made a poem about you or your organization. But again, so much more we could talk about, but I picked some of my favorite topics and some of that have impacted me most. And I just want to thank you for being here today and all that you've done for this beautiful community of ours.
Well, what I'd like to end with is a handshake.
Okay.
Can we get underneath?
Yes, we're going to do a handshake, and it's very special because tell us why it's special.
A handshake is how Gary Tice and I started the bank. It's about your honesty. When you shake a person's hand, you enter their protected space. Who gets inside your space? Only people you love. A child, a spouse. You bring them in when you give them hugs into your space. But anybody can enter that space through a little portal with a handshake. And so I was just able to get into your personal space, and you just gave me a signal about the eyebrows. And when you do that, raise your eyebrows because it's more welcoming.
We would always practice the eyebrows, right? So it's the handshake and it's the eyebrows because it makes people feel more welcome. And
got it.
We would practice that. So that's the last tip we're going to leave everybody with. When you shake somebody's hand, raise your eyebrows. So Garrett, again, thank you so much. Again, I'm getting off. We could talk for hours, but for now, I just want to close with that I hope that you will find a way to engage in the community. Be more like Garrett Richter because community matters.